It is my pleasure. My name is Saif Rashid. I am co-chair of Campus Mental Health, one of the community of practice, and I'm at University of Toronto Scarborough. And I will turn over to Lena, who will introduce herself. She's our co-chair.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lena DiGenova from McGill University, and we are delighted to have you here today to talk about mental health trends across post-secondary campuses in Canada. And just a quick note about logistics and a reminder about the audio. If you are calling in on your phone, please mute yourself from your end. If you're using a built-in audio, you will be muted automatically. So this webinar, just to let you all know, will be recorded, and we will definitely share the link with you later on this week or next week. And we are so happy that we have the functionality to make this webinar interactive. You'll be invited to complete a few quick polls and submit some comments and questions. So to get us started, we'd like to take this opportunity to find out who's joining us on the webinar today. Since the webinar is about national trends, and I saw that we also have an American on the line, welcome. We'd like to hear what part of the country you are joining us from. So for our first poll, we already have some folks who are filling it in. What part of the country are you joining us from? Eastern Canada, Ontario and Quebec, Prairies, Western Canada, Territories, and we now have an item for outside of Canada. Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. A few more responses coming in. Okay, so we're ready to close the poll. We have lots of folks today from Ontario and Quebec, followed by Eastern Canada, the Prairies, and then Western Canada, and a few folks from, actually, well, just one from outside of Canada. Thank you all for completing the poll. And a warm welcome to you all. So over to you, Tayab.
Thank you. My special thanks to folks who completed the survey. A couple of weeks ago, our COP sent the survey. This is part of a larger report we are drafting, and hopefully we'll be able to share that with you as well, to look at what are the contemporary trends, especially in counseling. So we received 58 responses. Almost all of them are complete with few omissions. So 53 were complete responses, and they were from college university and college directors of counseling centers, the head counseling leads. So I am especially grateful to everyone who completed the survey. And I'm also thankful to our ministry here, which is Ministry of Advanced Education and Skill Development of Ontario, with whose funding we are able to do this project. So big thanks to them as well. And next slide.
Great.
So there are 10 questions, 10 sort of big topics that we have divided our results into. So I'm not going to go through those because those will be coming through slides, and you are able to also download those slides. So because it'll just eat a lot of time. So rather than going into these, asking those questions, let me go through the framework on which our work is based, especially our community of practice on campus mental health. So CAUCUS, which is Canadian Association of College and University Student Services, and CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, collaborated on a 3-year project, and we released a guide. It's called Post-Secondary Mental Health. It's a systematic approach, and you can see that slide. This guide is looks at mental health on a systemic basis, from institutional structure, organizational policy and planning. Then you look at supportive, inclusive practices, awareness, which applies to all students. Then you look at the next two bands, we call it Wi-Fi diagram, community capacity response, self-management, and then it goes down to crisis management. So most of our work is rooted in that. So this, I have also posted a link in the chat where you can find much more about this guide and assessment and inventory and resources related to that.
Great, thank you, Tayab. So we'll move on to the actual survey results, and we'll start with the methodology. The online survey was distributed nationally to counseling and campus mental health leaders, and Tayab and I are delighted to have received responses from each of the provinces and a few territories too. Over 50% of the respondents were from Ontario and Quebec, followed by 28% from Western Canada, over 12% from Eastern Canada, and 9% from Prairie provinces. We're also pleased to report there was an excellent mix of responses from small, medium, and large institutions. In fact, it was almost a three-way split between the institutional size. And over 20% of responses were from colleges and just under 80% from university. So now that you know who completed the survey, it's time for our second poll. We'd like to learn more about who is on the line, and we have a question here for you today. So the question is, what is your role on your campus? And thank you, Megan. So we have Counseling, Mental Health Director, Health and Counseling Director, or Counseling and Mental Health Associate Director. We have counselors, managers, senior leaders, student affairs professionals from outside counseling and mental health, student, and no vote. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds here as the responses pour in. Okay, thank you all. So it looks like we have the majority of folks on the line are counselors, and we have a few counseling and mental health directors, as well as some managers and student affairs professionals from outside counseling and mental health. Thanks to everyone for completing the poll. Now here we take a quick look at the distribution of responses and by general function. We have 37% of those who completed the survey who were counseling directors, followed by 21% who were the director of counseling and health services. There were also 12% who are in senior roles such as student services leads and deans, and last but not least 10% as managers. Now moving on to the heart of our survey questions. We'll start with the first one. What are the 5 most pressing psychological concerns presented by students? And here we see in this quick chart, the 5 top were anxiety and depression, followed by trauma, relationship issues, and then suicidal ideation. We also saw in the survey responses we had some academic issues and learning issues as well. So look at the activities which consume the most time of our clinical staff. And before we move on to the results, we'd like to hear from you. We invite you to type your responses into the chat feature to let us know which activities consume the most of your clinical time. So please use the chat feature to add your responses. So we see lots of folks who are typing. Okay, we see quite a bit here coming in for individual counseling appointments, one-on-one appointments, depression, and yes, relationship issues. Okay, thank you all. What we saw from the survey results was that 20% or 19% of time was consumed by one-on-one counseling appointments, followed by walk-in and drop-in counseling and crisis intervention, both at 13%, and 9% for group counseling. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Tayab, for how intakes are conducted.
Okay, thank you, Lena. Just a little bit context to the presenting concerns. The presenting concerns, as reported by mostly counselors and directors and team leads, top three concerns, anxiety, depression, and relationship, are pretty much similar, with the finding of the Association of University and College Counseling Center Director Survey, which is conducted in states every year. David Reeds at Buffalo is currently doing this year's. So our issues are not any different, especially the top primary issues. Now, a third question was, we also wanted to know how intakes are conducted. So when we look at the results of this question, we found that there's a formal intake process, and 75, almost two-thirds of these intakes are conducted in person, and 16% were conducted over phone. We had a couple of responses which were online as well. So this, to the question number 4, I'm going to turn over to that's actually, sorry, mine. How many hours are allocated to walk-in counseling, and what specific concerns are addressed? Why we asked this question, because lots of counseling centers are now adapting this approach of how can we make the counseling services more accessible. We found that 67% of our counseling centers offer walk-in counseling. We also asked them that how many hours. So on average, there's 2.4 to 8 hours. That's the band we found. And one campus reported to offer evening drop-in hours. So there's a huge variety, but most of the counseling centers offer anywhere between 2 to 4 to 6 hours of walk-in counseling. And then we asked, the next question was, what kind of concerns are addressed in walk-in counseling, because if you want to increase access, what's the premise under which the access is provided? Most common response was crisis intervention. A number of counseling centers have used the walk-in counseling as a triage to access counseling services, a quick assessment of what the issue is, the severity, the acuteness of the problem, or if there's any high-risk situation involved, can they be prioritized. Suicidal assessment is also a most common one, and mental health status assessment. We also found stress management was one of the issues, and the stress management could be because of a number of concerns. So basically what we see, walk-in appointments are addressing whole slew of things.
Great, thanks, Tayab. So we'll turn over to our fifth data insight that looks at a session limit policy for individual counseling. And here we have another poll for you. We'd like to get a sense from you, is there a session limit for individual counseling at your institution? I always love this part, Tayab, the results pouring in.
I know. It keeps on changing too.
It speaks to my love of data. Great, thank you all. So, looks like more is coming in. Okay, great. So we have over 40% saying that there is in fact a session limit, and 21% were unsure. So thank you all for completing the poll. And when we look at the survey results, we see that 61% did not have a session limit policy in place, and that 39% did have a policy in place. So Tiab, did you want to comment a little bit more about the different session issues?
Yeah. So why this wanted to explore this because I mean, both Lena and I have been in the post-secondary mental health for a couple of many years now, and
More
we
than
are
I'd like
now
to think.
seeing a trend among counseling centers that it's short-term counseling. Um, but how this short term is defined, is it their number of sessions? And what is the what's the modal number of sessions? If there's a policy and how that policy is devised. For our own counseling center here at University of Toronto Scarborough, we did about a three-year study, and we found that because our students used to get OQ 45, which is outcome measure, at every session. So we have now a database of about 14,000 sessions of OQ, and we found that you start seeing the changes, especially in symptoms, um, around 5 to 6, or session number 5 to 6, and there's no reason or rhyme that how these sessions are done like weekly or bi-weekly. So that actually helped us to devise our policy to aid, but what we call is a soft limit policy, and many institutions that cited has this loose soft policy because there are overriding concerns of safety and many other things which all of you can cite uh, from your own institute. And who decides that? In most cases, we ask, the survey results have indicated it's the clinician's discretion, but in many cases, this discretion is also as a result of consultation.
Yes, that was definitely evident from a lot of the comments. And many respondents commented on the fact that the clinician discretion and the loose policy, it was kind of a loose policy, were probably the most cited comments in the text boxes. So over to our next question. Tayeb, would you like to comment on the embedded counseling?
Yes. So because the survey is about contemporary counseling practices and trends across Canada, and without boosting too much, I can assure you there's none data such like this exists. There was a survey done on Canadian counseling by directors in 2004. I don't recall seeing anything where we had a nationally representative sample. And things have changed since then. And one of the changes which we are seeing across counseling centers is rather than providing services at a specific location, the typical counseling center, that's been a traditional model, are you adopting new models and embedding counseling services? That model is being utilized. So let's see the results of that. And it's 43% of counseling centers services said that they have embedded counseling program, and that means about 54, almost 54% don't. Then we also asked, if you responded yes, then we asked that how many embedded sites you have. So 36% had one embedded site, 12% had two, and 16% had three embedded sites. So most of them were around, the average was around 3 to 4. Among those who had embedded sites. There's one counseling center, because this is an anonymous service, we don't know, that it had 24 embedded sites. So it clearly seems a shift because we don't have any prior data to compare it with, but I think that model is being also applied. So I see a quick question from in the chat from Carleen. What does embedded counseling model mean again? So you send typically you make an arrangement with let's say management department that one of our counselors will come and spend a day there, and then you advertise. And the department provides them a space, and then they market that embedded service to the student, especially of that department management, and then the student can access the counselor right then and there. But the other advantage of embedded services is also the quick consultation by faculty and staff about should I refer, how should I refer, should I refer for embedded or should I refer to the main counseling center? I hope that answered this question.
And Tayab, we also see a lot of embedded counseling in residences, for example.
Yes, and in fact this year I'm spending 3 days in student residence. In fact, if you look at historically, the embedded counseling model began if one site was where we could pinpoint, it was the student residence, because the unique set of issues students bring to that site. An important point is, which we don't have more sophisticated data, that from counseling centers, your embedded services, if students can access only through the department, or they can also come to the main counseling centers. My understanding is, but I don't have any number to support that, it's mostly students can access both channels.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tayab. Our next question looked at the types of, or the kinds of preventative mental health programs that are most commonly offered. And there certainly feels like there's an expansion of preventative programming across the country. And as I mentioned, this question takes a closer look at what is most commonly offered. And here's just a quick word cloud here that summarizes a couple of the survey responses. So here we see quite a variety. We have things like safe talk suicide training, to psychoeducational programs, meditation and mindfulness groups, as well as specialized support for Indigenous students. Also mentioned by the respondents were educational campaigns, yoga, workshops on things like test anxiety, that still matters very, very much on our campuses, as well as some newer resources such as online programming for resilience. And one of the things that really struck me was that these responses represent quite an exciting and broad range of supports for students that really speak to the continuum along the post-secondary education framework that Tayab, or the Wi-Fi symbol that Tayab described earlier in the presentation. Now, when we take a closer look at the distribution of responses, we see that 44% of respondents offered workshops, seminars, and psychoeducational programming on a wide variety of topics. Then we had 26% who offered outreach initiatives, and this included everything from health promotion to educational programming, a lot of mental health literacy, certainly in the form of mental health first aid for faculty and staff across campus. Next, we also saw that we had groups, as these group therapies and support groups were quite significant at 22%. And here too, we saw that they ranged on a variety of topics and definitely included things like mindfulness meditation. We also had an opportunity to take a look at some of the open-ended comments, and there were lots of programming or initiatives, such as having a mental health wellness coordinator on a campus, and a lot of programming that took a closer look at holistic wellness and included things like nature walks and runs, and lots of partnerships with different campus stakeholders, which I think also speaks to the spirit of that Wi-Fi and educational, that Wi-Fi symbol, and looking at the mental health from an ecological perspective. Over to you, Tayab.
So actually, Lena, if we can just go back to the last slide, One of the things which, again, this is, we wanted to keep the survey brief so we could get a good number of responses. We cannot ascertain um, how you are using, for example, on this slide, you're seeing mental health wellness programs or different initiatives. And you look at the word cloud. If Lena, if you can go back to the word cloud, yes.
Sure.
So this one, it's uh, it's it's every campus' own discretion that if, for example, safe talk suicide training, are they doing it as a primary prevention, or primary prevention is which benefits all students? Psychoeducational workshop about health promotion, are they targeted to some specific students who might be slightly more vulnerable, which is the secondary tier of prevention? And then test anxiety would be the tertiary kind of prevention. So this the grain, please view these these responses with a fine grain understanding that we are not saying that these are ultimately the preventative programs. These are the programs which every campus, every respondent deemed that they use as preventative. So if you give these illustrations to someone in the preventative science, they may look at them from a different perspective. But that was not the intent of our survey. We can go to the next slide, Lena, please.
Sure.
Yes, the next one, please. Yeah. So we also asked, there's a greater push among many student services, but specifically among counseling services. Are they effective? And how do we assess the effectiveness of the treatment? The effectiveness of the treatment is one way is you provide treatments would tend to be more effective, which have some solid evidence base. For example, everyone is you're from the counseling world. You know, my treatments are effective because I know CBT, which has loads and tons of evidence available. Then the effectiveness also for many other treatments which have came, especially for young adults. Number of campuses are offering DBT-based, dialectical behavior-based treatments. Some are more specific. Some campuses are offering sort of a lighter version. Some do ACT therapy. Some are doing narrative therapy. So we also wanted to see what's the national landscape in terms of specific evidence-based treatments, and which one are being offered. So can you go to the next one? So the first, are you using those? So 25%, so this was a Likert scale question. With Likert scale responses, almost always they use are about 25%, often use about half of them. So about 2/3 of our counseling centers are, according to their own reports, we have no way to ascertain that, are using evidence-based treatments. And again, it is clinicians' discretion that how these treatments are based and administered. Are they based on client needs or counseling centers' needs? Are they embedded in individual approaches or group approaches? So the mix of ways evidence-based approaches are being used. But I think in order to do a sort of a climate survey and to ascertain the trends of counseling practices across Canada and in counseling centers, we need to ask this question: what are the evidence-based treatments and how they're being used? So this is our first teasing of that segment. Good. And And the next question is, I'm just showing my slide, which specific standardized measures are being used to evaluate the impact of counseling services? So when you say evidence-based treatment, one of the component of evidence-based is, are you evaluating it? And if you're evaluating it, what measures you're using, because there can be many, many measures. So based on the established literature, we gave top 7 or 8 choices, and we can go to the next one. So standardized measures used to evaluate counseling impact of counseling services, 40%, which is very good. I remember we did a smaller version of the survey a couple of years ago, and this percentage was much lower. So, it's in my view, it's an encouraging sign that we are actually exploring the impact of counseling services through a standardized measure. We can go to the next one.
Now, Tayeb, did we want to take a second to just include a poll about whether our participants are using standardized outcome measures? I think we have one set up here that takes a closer look at whether our participants on the line are using things like the CCAPS or BMH20, the OQ45, as you mentioned. Then there's the ORS and the PHQ. We also have an option for in-house feedback, those who might not be sure, and those, of course, who are considering an outcome measure in the future. Okay.
So it looks, we'll give it another couple of seconds. Okay, so it looks like the winners or the top ones are in-house. It's about 19%. Don't know about 9. And then the bigger, the largest proportion is considering. I hope, Lena, and I hope that this webinar is an impetus for you, and we will certainly encourage you to select and use a measure. But in terms of specific measure, there is CCAPS, which is College Counseling Association Services Measure. I don't know the full acronym offhand. Is used by a number of folks according to who are attending this, and then closely second is PHQ and ORS2 as well. There's a growing trend, looks like, BHM. So Lena,
Absolutely.
can we go to the slide?
Sure. Okay, so this is what our respondents had to say.
Pardon, sorry?
This is what our respondents had to say.
Yes. So our respondents, the clear majority, about 26% were using CCAP, and same number were using BHM 20. In-house came the third, and then OQ or SPHQ about the same. So it looks like, again, if I compared results for another survey we did a couple of years ago, OQ45 was, in those days, was used most. But lately what we have seen a trend of using a shorter measure. OQ45 is obviously 45 questions. CCAP has 2 versions. One is 62, and then the second one, a shorter version, is 34 questions. And BHM 20 is obviously 20 questions. So this is, again, this is an encouraging sign for us to see that people are using standardized measure, and they're using this variety of measures. A couple of words about how some counseling centers are using these standardized measures. So some counseling centers are using CCAP as a baseline because it gives you some specific uh, glimpse of presenting problems. So there are scales which are not exactly mirrored at DSM-5, but it gives you indices on depression, anxiety, etc. So they use that as a baseline, but then they use BHM 20 on regular basis, which was our next question.
Okay. Taib, I also wonder if folks across the country are using more outcome questionnaires because we now have access to better tools, such as electronic health records and whatnot. What do you think about that?
Definitely. It's my understanding is folks are using more because it's digitalized, and some electronic measures are being used. Because they are inbuilt in some of the online therapy program. For example, some of you may be familiar with Tau, and BHM20 is inbuilt in Tau. So again, in the last couple of years, we are seeing this this trend across the country that more standardized measures are being used because accessibility is, as Lena reported, is becoming better. And again, I would encourage you. You're welcome to contact both of us if you have any questions how you can use these measures. We'll both of us will be at caucus to respond to any questions regarding about measurement.
For sure. And in the chat box, we have a comment from Joanne. Thanks, Joanne, for confirming that the CCAPs and the BHM do integrate with titanium. And we also have a few other questions in the chat that we'll save for the end of the presentation. Okay, so.
Okay, so actually, let me address one of the questions from Leah. Is anyone using flourishing measure or strength measure in addition to measuring deficits? That is actually our counseling center for last 5 years. We just put a little hiatus in the last couple of months, but for last 4 years we have used a strength measure based on VIA values and action model. So our intake was part online and part in person. In the online part, we measured strengths as well, and when the student came in the center, we gave them OQ45. Both of these measures gave us leverage to ascertain if the students are flourishing or they're languishing. So my other very humble suggestion would be if you're using measures of deficits, which typical and mostly used, please also consider using measures of strength. And in our report, which will come very soon, we'll have much more to say about the predictive validity of strengths in outcome.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then the last question was how you use outcome measure, and that's a tricky one. So let me set the context before we share the data with you. Number of counseling centers want to, and they find it taxing, and most of you will agree with me. It's very difficult to give every session the outcome measure at every session. The challenge is when you give a measure at the baseline and then you decide I'm going to give it every 4th session or at the exit, the challenge with this, especially with the measurement or in evaluating the impact of your services, counseling services, you're going to have a lot of gaps. There's needless to say that how many students drop out from treatment. A number of them, and the rate varies depending on the presenting issues, depending on the academic time of the year where the students are in the academic calendar, and there are so many reasons. So, it's according to best practices guidelines, it might be best that you give every session. So let's see what our responses were.
Okay.
So 38%, this is a very, very healthy sign. Every session they give it. So because I think folks are now catching up to this, that there is, if they don't give it every session, then you're going to have no exit data, no data about the final session, which you can't predict. Before and after, about 20%, 19%. If you have a good system that you can track the student who hasn't came, and there's someone in your administrative structure who can track them down for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever is your sort of a case closure policy, then you can send them online. But keep in mind that data would be contaminated because the end of treatment and the time the survey, the exit survey is done. And the 42% were the other. So this included both before intake, every 3 ongoing sessions as progress measured throughout counseling, at initial session, every 3rd session. Again, it's absolutely up to you how you want to give these measures. If it's suitable for your administrative structure to give it every 3rd session and you can manage it, fine. But my recommendation is definitely give. Ideally give every session. And also now, because of, as Lena said, accessibility, you can buy, in our center we have now tablets. We've switched from OQ45 to, we're switching actually from OQ45 to BHM20, which is relatively shorter measure, and it can be done very quickly. So about 2 minutes. So, but including a measure is important. Lena,
and I really like the BMH20 because it includes a readiness scale, right? Which is something that, to my knowledge, you don't see in some of the other measures.
Yes, absolutely. So any concluding comments before we open up for discussion, Lena, from you?
No, I'm actually really excited to get started in answering some of these questions. Looks like our members are definitely typing in here.
Yes, yes. So please feel free to ask questions. And we both apologize if we went quickly. I think our intent was to get through these slides so that we could answer, we could have plenty of time, and we do have good 17 minutes according to my clock to answer your questions.
Well, we have the first question here from Daniel, who has been so patient, who asked a question for you, Tayab, specifically about your time as an embedded counselor in residences. So I think the specific question was, when you say you spent 3 days in an embedded site, does this mean 3 days weekly or throughout the semester?
Throughout the semester. This is the first year. Our campus has experimented to give 3 days. That's 3 days is a big chunk of time for any embedded site, but because of the concerns which we experienced last year, that was the case. However, in summer, at the end of this month, that will change slightly, but it is my understanding that it will continue for another year, at least 3 days. Or it could even become more.
Okay, great. At McGill, we do have a few embedded counselors as well right now in the residences. I believe they're at 3 sites right now. And we're looking at some different models for embedded advisors this upcoming year. Now, if we turn our attention to some of the questions in the chat box, we have a few questions about flourishing scales. And if we can provide just some examples of different types of scales and their goals. Now, Tayab, I know this is near and dear to your heart, so would you like to share some of your findings and insight into flourishing scales?
Flourishing is again, thank you, Lena. We probably need another webinar, but very briefly, Corey Keys has a flourishing scale, 14 items. But when our center, our campus has a program, actually it's called Flourish. We adopted a more rigorous approach, same model of Corey Keys, but rather than giving one measure, we assess flourishing by two measures. One was we will probably change, but for about 5 years we have OQ to measure stress, and flourishing inventory, which is based on Seligman's model of PERMA, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Each word stands to make it acronym PERMA. So the flourishing scale, we deemed student to be flourishing if they scored in the non-clinical range on OQ, which is less than 63, and above mean on flourishing, which is 96.
And how long is that scale?
That is 25 questions. Good news is if you Google UTSC and Flourish, you can get the flourishing assessment free with feedback for anyone in the world can do it. Again, I'm thankful to the ministry funding that we had. Because of that funding, we were able to build a platform of through which post-secondary students can assess their flourishing status there. We cannot do the stress measure because of the liability issues, but they can do flourishing, strengths, and student engagement. Thank you, Megan, for putting. You can see in the chat box the link. If you go there under assessment, you will find.
That's great. We also have another question here from the Youth Saskatoon Student Affairs and Outreach team. Thank you for your question. And their question is, do you have any institutions map the specific use of mental health services to retention attrition rates to assess the value and impact of supports? Great question.
And Lena, I'm going to turn towards you if you have any insight. It's a great question.
So this is something that I have been trying to do for years. I'm not going to lie, but we are about to implement some new tools on campus that will finally make that possible. So I look forward to coming back and sharing some of these findings in a few years. But if anyone wants to touch base about how to do it and some best practices, by all means, please contact me, and I'm happy to put everyone in contact.
My general comment, thank you, Lena. That's wonderful. My general comment is, as much as I'm familiar with the literature, from University of Delaware, Bishop is the last name. He used to be director. I had the pleasure of attending some training with Ian Bishop. I don't know the first name, but last name is Bishop. He published a paper in Journal of College Counseling, and which shows a very distinct and clear relationship between people who attend counseling and their academic performance. From our Flourish program, our correlation is modest between the retention. However, what we found is those students who are who enter university in a flourishing state. So basically, again, high well-being, low stress in September of every year. So we've been measuring that, and then 4 years later we look at their graduation status. So it's not a retention, it's not directed towards your question. We found that students who entered our university in flourishing states were 2 times more likely to graduate than those who were languishing. Languishing were high stress, low well-being.
Okay, great. That's some really interesting insight to have. Thank you. I really hope that we do get some more data across the country, so we'll be able to share that with everyone. We have a few other questions, and we have a little bit of time. From the Youth Saskatoon team again, we have, is there data specific to counseling backgrounds for example, masters in social work, psychologists, etc. Now, Tab, I don't believe that those were in this particular survey for this round.
No, for this round, we again wanted just more of a overview and wanted to keep the survey short. But that's a very good question.
And the next question is from Kyla, who asks if we plan to do a follow-up survey of students who have used counseling services that asks about the impact of studies on studies and completion, sorry. I think that's a great question to ask. And at McGill, when we did the CCAP survey, we used it as a climate kind of study to get a sense of how well students, not just those who came to the center, but those who essentially just general kind of like random sample from the university population. And we did include some impact questions for that. And we got a sense that we had some really good impact from the completion. We also do some surveys for those who actually come to the center, and we also got some similar results, but we haven't linked it specifically to their GPA, sorry, but we would like to do a little bit more formal study in the future.
And to piggyback on Lena's response, we did a survey last year. We called Students' Experience of Counseling Services. We specifically sent the survey to students who had 3 or more sessions. And we did a qualitative analysis, and we will be through our COP, we'll be distributing a report, and I will have some insights, some quotes from students about the impact of counseling services. But that is generally, as Lena said, that generally is the area where there's a gap. I think we need to include students' voices a lot.
Absolutely. So we have lots of questions coming in about single session counseling.
Single session, yes.
That's very hot on our campus too. We had our clinicians were trained in single session not too long ago. I think it was this semester.
So again, this single session is one of sort of a model embedded in the stepped care model, which Peter Cornish from Memorial University has been advocating. I think it's a great way, especially for students who have immediate concerns, which can be dealt with very in the moment kind of interventions, and there are now papers emerging. For example, I was just reading a paper, how to do a 90-minute model of hope with college students. So the only caution that I would have is before you do single session, you need a good baseline assessment so that you are providing single session to students, your clients, who really would benefit. And then you can quickly triage students who have more serious chronic issues to more appropriate level of treatment, because single session won't apply on everyone. So before you do single session, a good assessment is important.
Great, thank you. So, Tab, would you like to maybe how about we open the floor to our last poll about what other questions should be added to our future survey? And we invite everyone to add their comments in the text box. Again, the question is, what other questions should be added to a future survey about the national landscape of counseling supports? I think there's so much interest in the single sessions that it's still coming in. Great question from Joanne. Thank you. How many appointments per day do counselors see?
Oh, Yeah.
So that's a great.
Lena, do you want to tackle that one, and then I can give my...
Well, at McGill, we are a stepped care campus, and I hear that the appointments can range from 5 to 8 or 9. It really depends on the type of issue that's presented and whatnot. So we're going to see that change a little bit on our campus. We know that it's our second year of stepped care, and we're going to have some new tools, so I think that's going to change the work a little bit. How about for you, Tayab?
It's if you have booked appointments, our typical our counselors see 5 clients or 5 clinical hours, and a total of approximately 22 to 24 per week clinical hours. However, as the models are being changed, if you want to shift to 90-minute or half an hour walk-in appointments or walk-in triage, then as Lena said, it could be more than 5 because you could do a quick assessment in half an hour, and you can see 2 clients in an hour. So I think it's very good to see this much interest because this will certainly forward our discussion.
That's great. And there are lots of great ideas for additional questions. One that stood out for me, a new one, was around what are the intersections and overlaps between mental health and accessibility? So thank you, Carlene, for raising that as a question.
And Lena, I'm going to look towards you. And then,
so we have definitely over 15% overlap, but as I said, we are going to get some new systems, and we're hoping to be able to hone in on some specific data because something that we're looking to improve. And hopefully we'll be able to add some more data to that, certainly through these questions, but also from listening to our colleagues from across the country. So it looks like we're almost out of time, but we did want to take this opportunity. We will be definitely taking a look at all of the questions, and we'll be sharing the webinar. But Tayab, did you want to speak to the reception?
Yes. So at those who are members of Caucus and are also attending Caucus Conference 2018 in PEI, June 17, 18, I believe, to 21st, our COP in collaboration with another COP will be hosting a social gathering, a reception on Tuesday, June 19th at 6 p.m. the PEI time. So please,
good point.
Please, so don't put 6 p.m. on your current Pacific or Eastern time. You may miss that. So please attend, and next year we are also planning to use your feedback. We'll be sending our website, and we have an inventory and resource guide. Plus, we'd also want to hear from if you join our COP, if this was an interesting topic, please suggest, as we asked in the last poll, different topics, and we don't have to do ourselves. I think there are wonderful folks who are part of the symposium, and we can just have discussions, and we can have someone do small mini presentations as we did in our previous webinar with the spirituality COP. So all good. And before I finish, I also wanted to thank my co-chair, Lena, who is absolutely amazing, and she prepared these slides. I conducted a survey, but to put all the data together in such a coherent and meaningful way. Thank you so much, Lena. And over to you.
Thank you, Tayab, and thanks to one of my student staff who also helped out and who had also some interesting insights into the data. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. We look forward to sharing this webinar with you and hopefully seeing you at Caucus in PEI in a few weeks.
And before we go, Megan has asked a question, will the data be available to the members of COP? We didn't say this when we're conducting the survey, but all the data, the slides, much more details, we can, not immediately, but in near future, we can post on our COP's website. We can share
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.